Hey guys, Coffeeyay here, bringing the Beating Spin and Goes video pack. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, so let's get started answering them. First off, are they beatable? Yes. Tons of people have been making a lot of money in this format. These aren't rakeback games. Can have an ROI pre-rakeback, and it can actually be quite big for a hyper-turbo format. It's really important to remember that most of the opponents in these games are recreational players, pretty limited experience, and so you can definitely get an upper hand with a skilled game plan. On top of that, this tournament structure, despite being a hyper turbo, is really good with lots of room to push edges. The line levels are quite long, there's a lot of chips at the table, there's a lot of room for both three-handed and heads-up edges. All of this leads to quite a lot of post-flop play, and so skill is the deciding factor, and so if you're a good player, you're going to be able to beat these. Do we need to hit the big spins to make profit? No, because you can have such decent ROIs and a big skill edge, you don't really need to hit the biggest prize pools. Essentially, if you don't hit those biggest prize pools, it sort of acts like a small added rake. That's why the rake on the lower stakes games is higher, because those biggest prize pools are a little less likely. But because you can have a decent ROI, you're not in rakeback mode, a 1% hit doesn't actually change that much. And so your profit is going to rely mostly just on being a skilled player and winning a lot of games. And, on top of that, it's worth noting that you'll eventually hit one if you're playing enough games. But, the most important thing to focus on is that these are a skill game. These aren't these aren't a lottery. These aren't a chance game. These aren't slot machines. This is a skilled poker game where, strong players will win in the long run. My videos are going to be teaching you how to use the prize pool sizes even to maximize your hourly. It turns out that you can even use the spin and go mechanism to actually get some edge, because you can change how you play in the smaller and the bigger spins and adjust the population, and sometimes even get a little bit more edge because of the spinning element. Is it enough just to follow pre-flop push-fold charts? Are these hyper-turbo formats, isn't it just push-fold? So first off, following a chart is never sufficient to win at poker. If anyone tells you it is, they're wrong. Poker involves adjusting to your opponents, adjusting to the situation, and charts are just never going to be sufficient. On top of that, push-fold is not a winning strategy at most of the stack depths you'll encounter. Just because the hyper-turbo doesn't mean it's push-fold. You're going to be playing with quite big stacks. If you try to just play push-fold, you will not be a winning player. Pretty much guaranteed. So you're always going to need to adjust your opponents. And, even when the stacks do get very shallow, which will happen eventually if you play a long game, even when you're playing push-fold, you should be adjusting to your opponents. And you're going to need to, figure out how they're playing. So that's why my videos are going to be focusing both on sort of the theory, when push-fold applies, how it works in theory, but also application. I'm going to use a combination of concept videos together with practical videos where I use hands from real games and full game coverage. So how important is sort of, just practicing tight hand selection? Can we just get through practicing tight hand selection because, our opponents are really weak and they'll be getting it in really loose? Well, most three-handed situations call for wide ranges. And so you're not going to be able to just play tight and get through. A tight strategy will oftentimes be a very losing one. So if you have this kind of disciplined hand selection from formats like 9max, you're going to need to combine it with knowing when you need to widen your criteria. But there are certainly some times where you do need to be very tight. And so that's what makes three-handed play so interesting, because sometimes you're going to have to play very wide, sometimes you're going to have to tighten up. And so if you know when to do that, then you can start knowing how you want to practice your hand selection. On top of that, if you have a lot of patience, and waiting to hit hands and, understanding that you need to pass up on hands to get to the good ones, that kind of patience will help you, especially post-flop and three-way pots, where it is important to be patient and wait for the big hands. But overall, you're going to really need to know when it's important to play looser, when you should be playing tighter. And so that's why I'm going to be teaching pre-flop strategy in each of the three positions, and for each sort of different situation that can happen, whether it's small blind versus big blind play, button versus big blind play, three-way play. All of the different permutations are going to be covered individually, and so that way you'll know when to play loose, when to play tight, depending on the specific situation. How similar are these to six-max hypers? How close are they to that? So if you are a six-max player, you're going to benefit from that experience for sure. Having played two-handed, three-handed, it will help you. But that being said, six-max strategy alone is not going to be enough to beat the games. One of the major reasons is that there's no ICM. But on top of that, it's a less pre-flop oriented game than six-max, because when you do get to the when you do play short-handed, the stacks start out quite deep. Usually in six-max structures, by the time you get to the three-handed, two-handed segments, you're really shallow, and it is mostly push-fold. But because you start out at the deepest parts of a hyper-turbo format, three-handed, there's a lot of three-handed play that is very post-flop oriented. And so, on top of talking about pre-flop, three-handed, I'm going to be also going through all the situations you're going to be playing post-flop, talking about the different strategies, also talking a little bit about the population tendencies for every different situation. Again, for small blind versus big blind play, button versus big blind play, all of those different situations are getting covered with post-flop as well. So in the end, how difficult are spin and goes? How hard is it to become good? Well, it's important to know that, these are fast action, loose games. And so you're going to be playing wider ranges, you're going to be playing more pots post-flop. And so there's just a lot of decisions to make, which can make them quite hard. At the same time, though, the soft player pool means your initial mistakes won't be as big a deal, but you'll definitely need to have a big edge to win in the long run through skilled play. And all those decisions to make also mean that you get to make a lot of decisions, and that means that your decisions matter a lot. And so skill is very, very important. And so, I think that you'll be well prepared to get the upper hand in these games if you understand all the concepts behind the strategy in each three-hand position. That's why I focus so much time on concept videos. If you really understand what's going on, you'll have a great understanding of how to adapt to specific tables, how to adjust your game even when there are stronger players at your table, and you'll be able to beat them. How much do you need to know about shallow stack play? Small changes in stack depth cause really big changes in optimal strategy when you start out already shallow in these hyper turbo formats. So adapting to the stack is essential. And so any sort of this deep stack experience from cash games, while it'll set you up for post-flop play, because you'll really understand post-flop range versus range thinking, it's going to be essential for you to start adapting to specific stack depth, especially pre-flop. And so that's why I have a lot of short stack stuff, a lot of push-fold theory as well in the video pack. And I'm going to be using a lot of Nash game theory to talk about push-fold and other shallow situations. But also I'm going to really focus on how to adjust them, how to use these different solutions. There's a lot of subtleties to stack depth in three-handed play, because not only does it matter what's the shallowest stack, but it matters, how much does the second shortest stack have, and what position is the short stack player. There's a lot of complexity that's involved in three-handed shallow play. And so that's why I go through a lot of different situations in depth, analyzing how these different things should change our strategy. How important is heads-up skill to success? Heads-up is a major part of spin and goes, because you'll play heads-up a lot. But if all you know is heads-up, you're not going to be doing very well, because you need to have a solid three-handed game to be able to get to heads-up with chip advantage. Three-handed play requires a lot of new skills compared to heads-up. As I already said, stack depth is more complicated. You're going to have to adjust to a wide variety of different situations, different starting ranges. It is really a whole new game. If you aren't a heads-up player, I did create a heads-up crash course specifically for Spin&go players that I've included with the video pack. The video pack focuses on three-handed play because it is the more important elements of Spin&goes. But if you're not very confident in your heads-up game, I will have a quick crash course specifically made for spin-and-go players. And so you'll start out with a solid strategy and understanding of the player pool, which is really important. So even the players who have some heads-up skill should go through the crash course, because I talk specifically about the player pool in these and the stack depth that you'll see. And I also provide a lot of resources to continue improving past that video pack. So I'll give you a lot of ways to improve your game on your own as well. What about the variance? A lot of people have talked a lot about the variance in these. Is it just going to drive you crazy? So it is higher. Variance is higher than, for instance, in heads up sit and goes. It is certainly a higher variance format than that. But at the same time, it's still lower than many forms of poker that people have been playing for very long periods of time, like MTTs. So it is manageable. And variance strongly depends on you're in the money in these games. So your variance might drive you crazy if you have a very low, very close to break even in the money. But if you have a very good skill edge and have a high in the money, you'll experience fewer downswings and less negative variance. And so it's really important to focus on improving your game to lower your variance. But on the other hand, it's important to remember, variance isn't all bad. High variance also means bigger winning days, and it can really bring a lot of excitement to your grind too. I know that for me, it's quite exciting to sit down every day and play a spin and go, because you never really know how much money you might make. There is that excitement that you're really excited to play the next one because you never know what's going to happen. So variance isn't all bad, and we have to remember that variance also brings a lot of new players into the game. So it makes it more fun. And that's why people enjoy playing these games. So it's not the end of the world, and it is manageable. And I make sure to really cover variance in the video pack as part of my general information video, so that you have a little bit more understanding of what the variance actually is. And so I'm going to teach you how to understand variance, predict downswings, and understand just what spin and goes have in store for you. What about bankroll management, right? What kind of bankroll are you going to need to play spin and goes? So this is very related to variance. Bankroll is very related to variance, and so it ends up being sort of the same. Bankroll requirements are higher than in heads up sit and goes, for instance, but they're lower than in MTTs. So it is a higher bankroll management game, but it's still manageable. Optimal bankroll management depends on your skill level though and stakes. So there's no easy answer in a sense. I can't just say, 200 bankroll management, 200 buy-ins or something like that. In order to really manage your bankroll properly, you're going to need to use your skill level and stake as part of the process. And so in the video pack, I go through a series of different move up, move down strategies for your bankroll. And so I provide a lot of different variations so that you can tailor your strategy to meet your goals and your personal situation for how much risk you want to tolerate, what stakes you're playing. And so, and on top of that, I'll also focus on estimating your future in the money in order to give you a quantifiable estimate of how good you are so that you can know better which bankroll management works best for you. All right, so how do you get the most out of this video pack? You've already decided to get it. How are you going to be able to get the most and learn the most to make sure that you're going to be beating spin and goes? So you want to watch the videos in order. This is quite important because knowledge from earlier videos is going to be used in the next ones. So by starting out in order, you'll make sure that you're getting the sort of basics, and then the more complex stuff will already assume that you have basics. So that's really important. It'll help you a lot. And in particular, when you watch the concept videos, you're going to want to watch the practical videos on hand history review pretty soon after the concept reviews, so that the concepts are really fresh in your mind when I start applying them in those specific situations. And so that's another really important thing, to try to get those the practical videos watched soon after the concept videos that they correspond to. Another way to really get the most out of video packs in general is rewatching videos. That'll help you build your understanding. If you didn't catch some stuff at the beginning, you might catch it the next time through. So it'll help get a broader understanding of the topic, but also, of course, get things fresh in your memory and help it stick. And lastly, one little trick to know, when you're watching the hand history reviews, a nice trick is that you can pause the video before I make my decision and give yourself a second to think about what you would do first. And that way, when I go ahead and act and talk about my decision, you've already sort of thought about it already, and you can see if you're making the same kind of decisions I am. That's all the questions. I hope that this gives you a better sense of spin and goes in general, about this video pack, And I hope that you go ahead and pursue spin and goes and continue with the video pack. Cheers, guys!